Monuments Fund was created in the United States in 1965 by a retired American Army Colonel, James Gray. He'd witnessed too much destruction by war and development in the mid-20th century, and in his retirement he wanted to join an organisation and make amends for that loss. But there was no organisation to join, so he set up the International Fund for Monuments, which by the 1980s was rebranded as World Monuments Fund. This exhibition shows you something of a glimpse of the 600 projects around the world in more than 100 countries that World Monuments Fund has taken on. But here at Sir John Soane's Museum, we're looking at the work of World Monuments Fund Britain. In the mid-1990s, World Monuments Fund created the World Monuments Watch, a biennial list of sites around the world which are significant, at risk, but the best of them have the potential for positive change. From the 2012 World Monuments Watch, in the UK came Coventry Cathedral. It's the only cathedral to be lost by war, and its standing ruins are now cracking and failing and need immediate attention. But the great benefit for us, other than securing those ruins, was that we learned that in September 1939, a year before it was bombed, the stained glass was taken out as a precautionary measure, and it's been stored out of sight for 70 years. It was covered in grime, so we've raised the money and spent the last year cleaning, repairing, conserving, cataloguing this glass, and some of the best of it is on display here at the Soane. Pieces like this extraordinary drawing of Christ and Judas.
The point about this stuff is that this is by a master of the time. It's some of the finest glass in Europe, and so, you know, just simply within the world of stained glass, this represents the very acme of what historically was ever possible. And just looking at the stuff, you appreciate just how expressive it was too. To anybody living in Coventry who dismisses the glass or the old cathedral, the new cathedral for that matter, or any of the work that's been done since in the centre, I would answer, it's all very well, you know, pursuing the grand design, the modern piece of contemporary architecture. It's all very well, you know, buying the brand new car. It's all very well going shopping for Dolce & Gabbana and Prada. But frankly, you know, where we're going as a culture depends on where we've been. You know, the lodestone, the compass of our lives, cultural compass that gives us a sense of what we're doing on this planet, comes from understanding where as a society we've come from and what has driven us. And it's that simple, you know, and you take all this away, you leave this buried in a crypt, you let it rot, or you let our cultural heritage decline, and then we are nothing, you know, we have no direction, we're animals.
Hampton Court was not a watch-listed site, it's not one at risk, but it had a specific problem that we were interested in. These are a set of terracotta roundels. The real ones, of course, are fixed to the building. This is a lenticular image that seems to have depth as you move around it. And it's one of a series of what now seem to be great military heroes, commissioned for Cardinal Wolsey, the builder of Hampton Court, around 1520. Actually, the invoice survives, and it tells us that these were painted and gilded. Must have been phenomenal. But today, they are weathered. That's the impression. Because when you look at this film, you can see that this particular individual has lost much of his hair and his laurel wreath. And this is where our intervention comes in, because this is an extremely high definition laser survey so that we can map the contours of these medallions very precisely and look at the incremental damage from winter to winter to figure out to what extent these need to be protected or even removed from the building and taken indoors. Thankfully, they can stay where they are. But this allows us to create a 3D image that we can analyze in great detail and even color without any damage to the originals. We've shot forward now to the early 18th century, and the sprawling city of London, rebuilding itself after the Great Fire, had got to such a size that when the Tory government came in 1711, they put a tax together on coal to pay for their new act, which was 50 new churches. It's a bold claim, and in fact only 12 were built. And St George's, Bloomsbury, was one of the greatest of these new churches. it was on an awkward site. It was quite thin from north to south, and Hawksmoor balanced that skinny site with a grand building by placing a spire to one side next to a big portico. The Victorians didn't really like that arrangement, so they did their best to mess it all up and move around the furniture, and by 2000 it was in a mess. The Victorian paint was looking faded and peeling off, the ceiling was collapsing underneath the portico, the sculptures had gone, and it was a poor shadow of its former self. This drawing is by Hawksmoor. It dates to about 1716. It shows the church in its full concept with a version of the ancient temple of Mausolus. Hawksmoor never went abroad, he just figured this what it must have looked like with its steps. And there are the scrambling beasts of the Hanoverian dynasty trying to get an audience with George I standing on top. It's a really brave piece of building, and what we did, I guess, was pretty brave as well. We had sculptor Tim Crawley put those beasts back up there and return the interior to Hawksmoor's arrangement, and now it's a thriving concert venue in the heart of London. Strawberry Hill in Twickenham is famous for a number of reasons, not least for the person who owned it, Horace Walpole, who came here for what he said was a little repose. Others said he's building the castle of his ancestors. And if you get the sense then that he arrives on the banks of the Thames in summer with this house as his plaything, he creates one of the formative buildings of the Gothic revival. It's not the first house to have pointed windows, but it is the first to try and look like a house which has developed over the years. It has an antique air. And here, in the summer months, open to the public, Walpole set out his incredible array of antiquities. It was a house of fascination and intrigue. These two photographs are 7 years apart in the life of Strawberry Hill. The last one is 2011, after restoration. The earlier one is 2004, when Strawberry Hill was watch-listed by World Monuments Fund. By that time, it had spent 80 years as a college, a Catholic seminary for the Vincentian fathers, who had used it, kept the heat and lights on, but sadly the wall surfaces, the silk was coming away, the paint had long peeled, the roof was leaking, and something had to be done. The fact that it was watch listed and got worldwide attention meant that the Strawberry Hill Trust was galvanised and prepared for action, and with £1.2 million of support from WMF, the result, this sparkling white vision, is a major restoration of one of the most important of English houses, and we're delighted with it. Stowe House, like Strawberry Hill, was a place for summer entertainment and also political shenanigans. You might talk about the business of the nation whilst playing croquet on the lawn. The political character of it extended to the interiors, and this is a drawing of around 1809 that shows the large library. It began life as a ballroom, was subdivided, but at the promise of a visit by George III in the 1790s, it was opened up again, and the ceiling was repaired with a large neoclassical panel in the middle. We know from research that went into the recent restoration on documents that happened to be in the Huntington Archives in Pasadena, California, that 15,000 leaves of gold were purchased for some space at Stowe House. Really, the library is the only contender. And paint analysis told us that we needed 15,000 leaves to reinstate the scheme that had been identified. It's a nice match of documentary reference and physical evidence as well. And so what you see here are the old, over-painted rosettes which were falling on people before it was netted 5 years ago or so. These are the new casts of the rosettes, or paterae as they're called, and then that's gilded, and this shows you the mould. So we want to show here some of the physical process that goes toward an authentic reinstatement of the finest of late Georgian libraries. This book is a stunning piece of work. In fact, it's one of the Italian Renaissance illuminated manuscripts illustrated by Clovio for Cardinal Grimani, 1537 or so. Now, what's this got to do with a house in Buckinghamshire? Well, everything, actually, and it explains why we're here at Sir John Soane's museum beautifully, because Soane was the last architect of Stowe House. He was certainly the designer of the Gothic library underneath the larger one, and it was Soane's only exercise in the Gothic style in 1805. So really important, and the drawings behind me are from that library. The thing is, Soane was never properly paid up for his work. And only in the 1820s, when the owners, the Temple Grenvilles, who came from Stowe, became dukes and achieved the status they'd always looked for, they said to Soane, look, you're a friend of the family, aren't you? Sorry about not being paid and all, but can you lend us £5,000? Now, nothing to me illustrates the rise and fall of aristocracy quite as much as the begging bowl given by a duke to an architect. And Soane was canny, because he was offered things in return for the £5,000, but he said, look, I haven't got space, not like he's a hoarder of antiquities or anything, but he said, tell you what, yeah, I'll have some of the cameos and some of these volumes here, including the Grimani. So what we see is the exchange of a duke's cultural goods with an architect who was really the archetypal magpie of fine antiquities. What Sir John Soane did in turning his studio and his house into a repository of antiquities, of lessons from history to inspire his students and the public alike is surely similar to what World Monuments Fund does. In a way, we collect projects, and our portfolio attempts to inspire people to make use of history, to give a future to our past.